You know, each month we choose a worship theme, and this month's theme is holding history. So what does it mean to hold history, particularly this recent history, which has been so challenging and difficult for so many of us? I do wonder how I will hold this history. And I wonder how we, us, even our country, will hold this history. You know, during the meditation, we talked about holding open palms under each other, and here's the image of that now to remind you. It's what came to mind for me as I thought about holding these troubled times. This past year and a half has been unlike anything any of us, not all of us, have ever experienced. With COVID and its so many resurgences, and political and social divisiveness, with violence and bigotry in the headlines almost every day, how might we as a community, as a faith community, hold this history and hold hope while creating meaning about these past couple of years? So as I've been thinking about it, I wanted to construct a framework that we might use to help us make meaning of this recent past. And so I asked Andy to share a reading from the Jewish scholar Eliezer Shore this morning. He talked about history and meaning. We each take in the world through our senses, what's going on around us, and we make personal meaning of it. And I guess I thought about that because so many of us were kept inside, away from other people, isolated. And first, the meaning we make, because there is no other meaning, is oriented toward ourselves, our personal needs and feelings. And that's just natural. But at some point, most of us ask, is this meaning too limited, too self-centered? Opinions and interpretations must be tested against what we know to be our truths. It's why our Unitarian Universalist principle is to affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. It's only after we've codified our interpretations that we then sit with them for a while, resting with them as they mature and solidify, so that we can expand from the meanings we make from the center of our own personal universes and begin to consider meaning something more, something greater, something more significant, by considering something larger than ourselves. This is when we start taking in the perceptions, experiences, and meanings that others have made. And we broaden our understanding of this history, including our understanding of the importance of this history, the value of this history, and the history that includes family, community, humanity, and or the oneness or presence of a divine. This is when we reach out beyond the transcending the self as the final mediator of truth. And in a moment when self-preoccupation ceases, we become vessels for something greater. Vessels for something greater. Well, for me, that's vessels for hope, love, compassion, justice. But I don't know about you, but a lot of times I feel like my vessel is cracked and needs another vessel beneath mine so I don't leak too much that I become empty. And I have to admit, sometimes lately when I'm alone, I'm not sure I want or am able to be a vessel for something greater. I have noticed, and I don't know if you have as well, but the events around me affect me more now. My resilience, my ability to adapt and snap back seems to have stiffened up. And my emotional reactivity is more easily impacted by events, even those that seem far removed from me and my life. I watched the election results come in from the Virginia's governor's race a couple of weeks ago, when Republican Glenn Youngkin won. And I was just watching it like I watch the news every day. And when they said he won, something broke in me, completely unexpectedly. All the buildup of existential fear and catastrophizing that had been lurking within me burst into my consciousness. And all at once, thoughts like we're going to become an authoritarian country, or racism will win, or marginalized people's rights will be rolled back, or women will lose reproductive rights, or the environment is just getting worse and perhaps beyond repair. I felt panic. I had to stop watching the news for a few days to regain my emotional balance. And as I see people in the world, I see people like me, too close to that last straw that will break their emotional camel's back. Perhaps you felt that too. Whether consciously or unconsciously, just waiting for that last straw. And so often people in the midst of that panic and fear find their feelings when they come out to be propelled out sideways, particularly toward those they love. People's feelings about politics and COVID are causing divorces, schisms in families. Even lifelong friends renounce their friendships. It is chaos. And I wonder, what will future historians think of this time? How will they make meaning of it? What lessons are we supposed to learn? How do we make meaning or derive lessons when we're still in the midst of all of this? In August, I presented to our Unitarian Universalist UU Miami Humanist group. It was titled Psychosocial Effects of Living in the Pandemic. I talked to them about how nurses and neonatal units were noticing that babies were showing fewer facial expressions than would be expected at this particular time in their life. Some research is showing that facial masks have decreased face-to-face interactions between caregivers and babies. And I talked about how Zoom meetings have resulted in increased fatigue because our normal perceptions and interpretations of body language are overtaxed, trying to read other people's behavioral reactions online. And I mentioned a case study. And in this study, conducted by a researcher at the Department of General Psychology and Methodology at the University of Bamberg, Germany, adult participants were confronted with masked faces showing 6 different emotions: anger, disgust, fear, sadness, happiness, and no feelings, just a neutral face. The results indicated that emotional recognition was strongly reduced, with the exception of fear and neutral faces. And after kind of saying all this, I was beginning to feel a little heavy. And so I mentioned the benefits and blessings of this time. I said Zoom has been a wonder for us. It has offered us opportunities to see people we love anytime, regardless of where they live, and has offered us more opportunities for learning as institutions are providing more programming online, from education to music. The list goes on. And Zoom has made it easier to do social justice, grassroots organizing with people all over the country. Not to mention that Zoom has increased accessibility to the world for people who have mobility concerns. But my presentation, and I began to notice, was so heavily laden on the negative effects of COVID. And I hadn't wholly been aware of that until I was actually saying it to them and feeling its effect on me. And with this awareness that as I talked about all this negative, some of the people that were there reacted against my negative impact and instead expressed more positive impact that this COVID time has offered their lives. Now, maybe that was because they were coping with the negatives better than me, or they didn't really want to deal with anyone who was highlighting all this negativity. But as I listened to them, as I heard their pushback, they became vessels of hope for me and for others in the group who were cracked due to fear and exhaustion. That fear and exhaustion that had colored the lenses through which I perceived current events. Their vessels were metaphorically beneath mine, helping me to hold in what hope and love and compassion that I still had. One reason we tend to become fixated and polarized is because individual and collective trauma that associates with a profound sense of insignificance. In other words, it feels like we don't matter. Research indicates that divisiveness will continue to grow if the fear of the other and the wounds fueling that fear are not addressed. My heart has been heavy about the divisiveness and fear so prevalent in our country. I find myself in times of quiet with thoughts about January 6th, the insurrection, on our fragile democracy, on the verbal and physical violence against marginalized groups, about the increased overt racism and so many isms, the increased boldness in militia and hate groups. It just scares me to death. The threats and violence and school board meetings and legislatures about vaccine and masks and critical race theory. It worries me. And restrictions on reproductive rights and voting rights takes my breath away. It feels like the loudest and most aggressive voices, even though they may lack facts and scientific truths, and base their views on conspiracy theories, are having a field day. And I wonder how do we not just survive this, but thrive? My answers came from unexpected places. Comic John Early says, "I feel there's no greater testament to the fact that our public institutions have failed us than the fact that comedians are somehow the moral authorities of the moment." A few days ago, late-night talk show host Jimmy Kimmel showed videos created by far-right Congressman Laura Boebert that featured multiple conspiracy theories. Theories like, we need a full investigation into how many puppies were eaten on Fauci's watch. And he showed these videos to random people on Hollywood Boulevard. And as he showed them these videos created by Boebert, he told these people that they were created by Saturday Night Live. And he asked people if he thought that Saturday Night Live had been too hard, gone too far in mocking Boebert. Jimmy ended saying, "And wouldn't you know it, we found all sorts of people who thought her real videos were written comedy bits." And actually on Saturday Night Live, not yet last night, but the week before, you might have caught the sketch of Goober the Clown. If you haven't seen it, I do ask you to consider watching it. The sketch was in response to the Supreme Court taking up the Texas abortion law, restricting all abortions after 6 weeks. The character of Goober became a metaphor for women. Why should women's autonomy be respected after all? They're just silly clowns. The whole issue, by extension, became a joke, not to be taken seriously. Goober the Clown's subversive humor, the character's ability to speak truth to power, only if she presents herself as harmless, shows another way that people cope with and respond to the destructiveness, the destructive voices and legislations all around us. Humor can sometimes open a door to talk about difficult and charged topics, addressing the fear of such topics, and perhaps even helping us find a way to see each other through our connections as people rather than a perception that is otherizing them or marginalizing them in some way. So that together we can find new ways to move forward, new ways to find hope again. History. See you in history. You, all of us, in history. History is the knowledge of and study of the past. The stories, the many stories that make up our collective memory. They include meaning and interpretation and significance that we put on past experiences and situations and trauma, for that matter. History is the story of who we are, where we came from, and can potentially reveal where we are headed. My friends, remote and recent history are important to study because it provides us essential context for all of us in understanding ourselves and the world around us. History can help provide us with a sense of individual and collective identity. Helps us to understand present-day issues by asking deeper questions as to why things are the way they are. It can help us become better informed citizens, help us maintain a strong, democratic society. And most of all, history is a story of us. We are part of history. And studying it helps us to understand and cope with change. It helps us to understand and cope with failures and successes. It helps us to look into the future of how we want to be. And one last thing, history is not just about who we are as individuals and how we analyze and understand the world. It's also how we are collectively as a community, how we together analyze and understand the world around us. And how we hold hope as we make meaning in the world. One of the reasons we gather in this sanctuary, on this campus, or in Zoom rooms together is for us to make meaning of our experiences together. The many changes that are going on around us and challenging us, if we had to do it all alone, might be too much. And so we help one another cope with the fear and panic when it arises up within us. We help each other to stop when that happens, whether it be remote or distant history, remote or recent history. And when we stop, we put our vessels beneath each other's so that we can hold each other's hope and love and compassion and need for justice filled to the brim within us, and decide with calm and resolute hearts how we will collectively respond to current events. UU Miami is a place where we can come to become vessels for something greater, together, to see deeper meaning, take collective action to make the world a better place for all. Here in this place, you will never have to be afraid of asking a difficult question or doubting a viewpoint or analyzing something that's happened in the world. Here we embrace history, looking at humankind's successes and failures, reflecting on this complicated world we live in. Here we help create active citizens, ready to respond to the divisions in society, Here we understand that events can happen, like COVID or the divisiveness, and we will not fall apart because there is someone with us, holding that hope with us. Here we hold history as important, significant, valuable, together, hands linked and hearts connected. This is a safe and brave space to hold history and together become vessels for something greater, to meet the needs of the world today. Reverend O. Eugene Pickett, the former president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, wrote, "For our human community, for our common past and future hope, for our oneness transcending all separation, and for our capacity to work for peace and justice in the midst of hostility and oppression, we give thanks." We give thanks. So I give thanks. I give thanks, and I hope you do as well, for this community and our willingness not only to hold history, but to hold it together, to hold it with hope and love and justice, so that we can make meaning of it during this difficult time. A meaning, I believe, that can bend the arc of the world toward justice.